was raised in a household with my father, his partner, my mother, and my younger sister. And we lived all together fairly harmoniously, I would say, till I was 14. And then at that point, I went to live with my dad and his partner, my sister, and then eventually with my mom.
Hello, and welcome to the Mindset and Self-Mastery Show. I'm your host, Nick McGowan, and today on the show, I have Ann Russo. Ann, how you doing today?
I'm great, Nick. How are you?
I'm good. I'm glad that you're here. We were shooting the shit before we hit record, and it's kind of classic for me. I get further into this, and I'm like, man, I just got to hit record. Like, we need to just do the damn thing. So why don't you start us off? Tell us what you do for a living, and what's one thing that most people don't know about you that's maybe a little odd or bizarre?
So I am a psychotherapist, and I am a small private practice business owner. We're actually online, and we were online before COVID. So I was, building a platform of diverse therapists to offer, access barriers to care, finances, things like that, just trying to get rid of all of that. And we focus on the queer community. We focus on non-monogamy. We focus on sexual health, sexual positivity. So I run that over here. And then my other hat is I work with people working on religious shame and sexuality, because I have a master's in theology as well. So I use that intersection. And I'm writing CEU courses right now, continuing education for mental health providers to talk about things that don't normally get talked about, like non-monogamy and religious intersection with queerness. And on top of that, I'm also the proud mom of a little doggy, and that's what I do for work, and it's awesome.
That is awesome. I mean, everybody that's listening, you can tell why I was just shooting the shit before we hit record. Plus, there's an immense amount of stuff that we want to get into, that, like the shame, even the therapy, the length of time to get into therapy, all of that sort of stuff. But before we get into that, what's that thing that most people don't know about you? It's a little odd or bizarre.
There's so many things.
Pick the strangest.
The strangest thing about me is I really love learning about people. So I've always gone into spaces that might seem a little strange or intimidating to other people. So I've spent time in brothels in Nevada, hanging out with the sex workers. I've gone to a lot of different sex clubs and hung out, dominatrix, BDSM, Bear Week with queer guys. I'm just kind of just allow myself just to be in these spaces. As long as people invite me into those spaces, I'm totally there to experience their life and what's going on, rather than have presuppositions. I even spent a lot of time in an evangelical church and went on a missions trip to Europe. A lot of people don't know that about me, but yes.
To jump from one piece of that sentence to the other piece of that sentence. It's a large jump.
I was at a sex club and then a missionary trip. Yeah.
But some people are PKs, they're pastors' kids, and they've done the same thing.
Yeah.
Potentially in the same day. So yeah, I get it.
Yes.
God,
where about learning, Nick?
Oh, where to start with this stuff? There's a lot of similarities, and truthfully, I look for the similarities when guests come through and they suggest that, hey, I want to be on the show or whatever, and we do our own research. I really look for people that are vastly diverse, but also to see if there are any sort of similarities, because then it's an easy way to kind of start the conversation and kind of go from there. So everybody listening, give me a little bit of the background here. But there's stuff that you've pointed out that I really think a lot of us have gone through, especially in this country. The amount of religious shame that we've had, the amount of sexuality being held back or told that they're wrong, or not being able to experience it, or having things that were additionally shamed on top of that, like being molested or raped or anything that was sexual abuse, and then still being part of the religious system. And I've experienced all of that. you mentioned about being on mission trips. I've gone to Russia a handful of times. Well, 10, 12 years ago, something like that. Did some great things I thought were great things, helping orphanages and building some playgrounds, rebuilding floors, and just helping these kids that just wanted to be loved, but then also being shamed about different things, and going through the experience of molestation as a child and being Catholic and all that sort of stuff. Now, I know that your background is a bit of, you were raised in a queer household, right?
Yeah, I was raised in a household with my father, his partner, my mother, and my younger sister. And we lived all together fairly harmoniously, I would say, till I was 14. And then at that point, I went to live with my dad and his partner, my sister, and then eventually with my mom. So it was a definitely a unique household. And during that time, it was like the 80s, the 90s. That was a big time around the like religious right, religious fundamentalism, very anti LGBTQ at that time. And so I was always receiving this information about how the church hates us or Christianity hates us, and I was so curious as to what that meant. Why did they hate us? And that's actually what propelled me to like join a fundamentalist church.
So go on.
Yeah.
That's just, you're kind of dangling it there at that point.
Yeah. So I joined a fundamentalist church right out of college, or right, excuse me, out of high school, right out of high school. And it was a cool church, nice people. They'd never really been exposed to gay people, and they had a very small idea of what it meant to be a gay person, that it was all, about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And and so I kind of came in there and I was like, no, this is not all about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I'm a queer person. They invited me into their church, and I really learned a lot about their theology and their belief system. And I went on a missions trip. I was really a believer in the idea of God, absolutely something more powerful than myself, but I could never really get down with the teachings. So I felt like if this is people are telling me that I'm going to hell, or they're telling other people that they're going to hell, this is so important to them. I need to understand what's going on. So I got my bachelor's in religious studies. And then from there, I went on to get my master's in theology. Look, Nick, these were important questions. I
Yeah.
don't think people take that. So it's like you're telling someone that they're going to spend
Eternity.
eternity in hell, and you're
Mm.
receiving a message that you're going to spend eternity in hell. Like, don't you want to do a little more investigation around that?
Mm.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So I investigated away for about 12 years. And I have landed in a space of understanding that perspective,
Mm.
knowing where it comes from. But then I have a lot of the historical biblical pieces that a lot of these fundamentalist folks simply just don't have, or maybe never really thought about. So I'm able to use that at the right time to help my clients, and also to communicate with the parents or the family
Mm.
that is having a hard time accepting. I can come at it in a way that's very loving and understanding to their position, and honoring their faith. It's a tough road, but I'm confident that the more exposure and the more conversations and the less anger, we can get to a place of understanding.
I love that you did a little bit of research.
Just a
12
touch.
years.
But
I mean,
yeah,
just a little bit. And
yeah, just
you posing that question of, don't you want to do some research with it? I think for the most part, people feel some of that. Now, we're all different and we're unique people, and some of us are more the researcher types of people that really want to dive in. I think there are also times where people are asked a question and maybe it just didn't land, but on a Tuesday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, after all these other things hit, maybe it really lands. And it could just be that timing. And I find it really interesting how that timing worked for you, but then also coupled with you're the researcher type. you wanted to actually go down and you wanted to find that out because it meant more to you. Like on the surface level, if somebody says, you're going to go to hell, you sinner, you're going to die, people will be like, okay, whatever. Then just kind of move along. Like, whatever, I'm just not going to listen. And that's the end of it. Or they might think, really? Is that a thing? Like, is that really going to happen? And then I think the worst part of that is where people can just be like, well, this is just what we do. This is how it is. This is just what it is. And to be able to question those things, I really think this is where this episode needs to go, because I've experienced that sort of stuff as well. I spent about 10 years, let's say, better part of 10 years playing lead guitar in different worship bands in non-denominational churches. Being there for all of it, all the creasters, the Christmas, Easter people, all the people that would come in that really needed some help and that were shamed, and like the people that would try not to shame. But then there would be even times like I would get shamed about shit for literally saying the word shit or telling somebody, oh, I smoked pot, doing this, doing that. They'd be like, oh, I can't believe Jesus did. And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, let's think about that for a minute. Jesus braided a whip in the middle of all these people and took his time to braid it and then went fucking bonkers to kick everybody out. And you don't think he did things or said things like curse words or anything like that? Do you think he was like, hey, all of you people, please hurry up, grab your things and get out of here gently and calmly? Of course he fucking didn't. No, there was more to that. But then there's also what happened in the 15th or 16th century when things changed in the Bible. What about the books that were omitted? And there are things of, like, I think of, God will speak to us in different ways. Somebody could speak to you and that could be a divine message. You could watch a movie and it's a divine message. Reading the Bible, you can still get the thing out of it that you need. And maybe it's not through the words, but it's the act of and what comes to that. But this is just from the little bit of research and the inquisitive things that I've had. So why don't we talk about that? Let's talk about the research that you've had, but also being able to actually get into those fundamentalist conversations, or the people that are like, but this is what I've been raised in. I was Southern Baptist or I was whatever. And like, this is just how it is. And everything needs to follow a law. And I don't know where that law came from, but here I am. I don't want to burn.
For sure. And I understand that completely. So I want to approach this with a lot of empathy and understanding, because I think the one thing that we can never really argue is faith.
Yeah.
Like, no matter how much one studies or doesn't study, can I ever prove or disprove the existence of God? No, I can't. I can only look at what's available to me in history to kind of deduce maybe what people's experience of their God looked like, not necessarily even who God is. Because how can we really even know that? We can only really know people's experience of understanding God or something higher than themselves. So I kind of put that in its corner and I say, great, I don't want to mess with anybody's faith. Then when I turn the page, I go to the other side of that and I go, what does history show us? For me, in what I've studied, history shows me that the Bible is a living document, and it has books in it that were decided by a governing body, not God, with the intent to control an empire. And some books were left out. Many books were left out. And I think that there's a specific narrative that they were looking for, and that's why the books are the books that they are. And I think we could have many different Christianities depending on what books were placed in something like a Bible. And we didn't even have a cohesive religion until 322, when they put the book together. And therefore, to take it as the word of God and live by it is tough, because there's so much contradictory messages just within the Bible itself, because those books are actually written by different people. They're coming out of different time periods, different languages. So it can't really be a cohesive, flowing document.
I actually tried to read the Bible when I was younger from start to finish. And I figured this is
How
how
did
you
that
read a
go for you?
book. It should, oh, it was the strangest thing ever. Just totally strange. I remember, I don't know if I actually read through all of it because that was a lot, especially as like, I don't know, I think I was like 8 or 9 or something like that. But I was starting to uh, learn about and feel my intuition. And I could feel that
Yeah.
there are different skills that I had, different thoughts and feelings. And I'm on the Enneagram side, I'm a 4, so I'm super feely. I feel all the things in the world, and I know that I'm I'm very close to the void. I can kind of step on either side of that. But I started to really dive in. I remember reading the first Genesis of Adam and Eve and thinking like, this seems very fable-esque. Like this is
Mhm.
more of a story. And I remember talking to my grandparents that are super Christians, like war cape, basically. Um, and they were like, this is true. This is exactly how it happened. I was like, so God peeled out a rib and just like, I'm just going to take your rib and I'm going to make a woman out of that. Like, yeah, absolutely. I was like, well, that's strange. And I remember talking to my mom who was Catholic and she was like, it's all fable, but it's supposed to have a meaning within the story. I was like, okay, cool. And then I think I skipped around and got to Revelation and my shit was fucked up at that point because I remember being like, what? All of this and like picturing the heads and like all these crazy things and like going from Old Testament to New Testament and Revelation and trying to piece these things together and then learning like there were things that were omitted and changed and understanding now that it was literally the government saying we want to control this. But it's
Yeah.
hard for people to separate that because it's a systemic thing. So how do you handle that when people come in and they're like, I feel all this either sexual shame or just shame in me because this is how I was raised and this is I'm trying to unpeel things from it. So how do you work with that?
So it's very dependent upon whether or not the person is still a Christian. If they're not, it really depends on where they're at in their spiritual
Mm,
journey. Okay, so it's very tailored to the individual, and it also kind of like what their end goal is.
hmm,
Some people may say, I'm trying to rectify these two things. I'm a Christian, I'm a queer person, or I have sexual shame around this due to my religion, but I very much believe my religion, right? Or I hate my religion. This doesn't make sense to me and I want to move away from that. So that's number one. Because I'm going to tailor my approach to wherever they're at. I'm not out to convince someone not to be a certain faith or to convince someone to be a faith.
mm-hmm,
So that's going to always shift my approach. So if it's someone who, let's say, still desires to be a Christian, I would say, I like to go into Jesus. I like to look at the Gospels. I like to understand. I like to look at Jesus. I like to have them tell me about where they learned the sexual shame from the Bible itself,
mm,
or was that a message from their church? Like, where did that come from? And kind of like start to peel back some of these layers. And oftentimes you'll find that it's really the church itself, not so much the faith or Jesus, God or human, whatever,
mm-hmm.
however your perspective might be, right? So it's really learning what it means to be connected to Jesus and have your spiritual experience, not your spiritual experience through a third party.
Yeah.
And this is a lot of work, Nick. I mean, it's a lot of work, lifetimes of work for some folks.
Yeah. There's a lot of trauma that's heaped upon you in a sense. I think all trauma comes from your childhood, at least somewhere. There's some genesis of that, some catalyst that happens when you were a little kid, whatever. Even if it was a great, upbringing, there's still trauma that happens with that.
Sure.
But within that system and being able to be part of that and have that want of I want to have that faith and we can't be the only things here and there has to be something else, but then being shamed and told that you can't be who you really are. um, One of the reasons why I love to be able to have people of other sexualities or gender fluid on the show is because I don't actually understand that from my perspective. Like I want to understand that, but I've never gone through um, coming out of the closet and saying, well, this is who I am and this is how I am. I've asked myself and I've tried to see, like, am I this way or am I different? And how does that relate to how I've been raised? But I'm not, so I can't ever really experience that. So I couldn't imagine what that would be like, having those really difficult questions and then being told you can't be you on a deeper level than, like, I was told, yeah, you have to get a job. You can't be a rock star. And I was like, all right, well, fuck you, mom and dad. Let me go try something different, but that's different than being like, you can't love the way that you love. And love is the core component of all of this. Oh, and by the way, God is love, but not in that way. Like, are you fucking kidding me?
Totally. And I think that it comes down to a complete misunderstanding of what sexual orientation is. Through my experiences with the church and through my experience of working with many fundamentalist Christian people, their arguments tend to line up that being gay is harmful. It creates a situation in which so studies do show, like, if you are a gay person, have higher issues with suicide, mental health, drug use, sex abuse, but like it's a litany, right? So these particular types of Christians will point to that research and say it's because you're gay. But if you look closer at the research, it's based in rejection. It's not based on the sexual orientation itself. So while you think that you're saving your child, for example, from a particular lifestyle, you're actually creating the harm that could push them down the road to be one of those statistics. And I think that that's really tragic because they don't have the ability to really talk deeply about what they're feeling as the Christian who's all of a sudden, my child has come out as gay. I don't believe in this. I don't want this for them. Someone like me who's worked with folks like that, I can kind of stomach that, and I can talk to them and talk through it and understand where they're coming from. But I know that it's gay folks in general are probably pretty damn tired of having to defend themselves, against the Christian rhetoric. So I think that's where, like, someone like me can kind of step in and go, okay, well, let's talk deeper. What's going on here? What are the fears? And let's discuss it. Let's discuss the Bible. Let's discuss Jesus. Let's discuss what it actually means to be queer versus, what you think it means to be queer. I remember when I went on the missions trip, I took a bunch of we were in London and I was like scouting the scene during the day and I was like, oh, this is the gay section. That was, the area where they wanted to pray for everybody. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to come back here later and go dancing. Well, some of the folks that were on the trip wanted to go with me out. I didn't say where I was going, but I said I was, I'm going to go out. And I'm like, okay, these folks go to a Christian university where they're not even allowed to dance. Yeah. So they ended up coming with me and I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to the bar. And like, they started to kind of dance. And I was just like, what's happening to you because you're dancing? Are you no longer a Christian? Do you no longer have faith in God? Like, I don't understand. Like, how is devoiding yourself of any kind of joy anti-God? Don't get it.
It's control, right? Back to the, I sometimes think about almost like the comical personifying of situations. Like, there was somebody back in the 15th century that was like, these people are just fucking everybody. And they're just doing all these things and drinking all the things and putting all the shit in their systems. And I've had enough of it. Is that because you're not getting laid? Yes, but fuck off.
Yes.
Like, all right, well, I was, we need to change the way that this Bible reads. So it needs to be different. And like, what were those conversations?
What happened with priests in marriage?
Yeah.
That's exactly what happened. Like, priests were allowed to get married, but the church didn't like that the land was going to the family when the priest passed away. So then they said, no, priests can no longer be married.
Wasn't there also something about marriages? Yeah. Like, didn't they, weren't early Christians anti-marriage? And then they're like, you guys just keep fucking each other, so you may as well just get married.
Yeah, I mean, we could go into a lot of debate around marriage in the first century for
Yeah,
sure,
yeah.
but I don't personally believe they were anti-marriage.
Interesting. Okay, cool. Uh, Um,
Yeah.
I find it so interesting that there are things that happen that then just become tradition. Let's say, like even within the family system, like everybody gets together on a Sunday and they have family dinner. They do the Thanksgiving thing. Those are traditions, but some of that's also based on historical and generational trauma, and you just call it tradition,
Yes.
and then you shame people
Yes.
around it. So same deal with all of this stuff where it's you're being shamed about that. Something you brought up that made me think of the systems thing too is how they're like, well, if people are gay, there's a higher percent that they'll kill themselves or they'll have drug use and all of that. That's just like saying that people that are in really, really bad neighborhoods that aren't given the resources to be able to not be a bad neighborhood, that they're just going to kill everybody. Numbers show that this happens. You're like, yes, it does, but you need to look deeper.
Yes. Yes. Why is this
Yeah.
happening? Right?
Instead of going, look, they're killing everybody. But yes, why? Give them the fucking resources to live or help
Yeah,
them.
exactly. And it's I think the best way to explain it to people, maybe like you were talking about, like being in the shoes of someone who's gay. Obviously, you're not going to be able to be in those shoes, but just imagine like your innate sexual orientation is wrong, like from because like what you're attracted to.
Yeah.
Imagine if you were told that that was not okay, and you don't even know why. You just are who you are, right? And you just can't be, and you have to hide it, and the whole world is telling you that that is not what's normal,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's easier now. I think it's gotten better,
Sure.
but what a very difficult position and a painful position to be in. I was lucky in the sense that I wasn't raised in the church, right?
Yeah.
But for those that were raised in those situations, I really feel for them. I have a lot of empathy for that struggle.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I brought up pastors' kids. The
Yeah.
saying is that they're just crazy. They just go kind of bonkers with things. I've witnessed it. I've partied with some of them, because they were. I
Yeah.
was like, cool, I can actually show my true colors here.
Yeah.
Instead of just being the dude at the church that's up on stage doing the things. And then
Yes.
it's wild with all of that stuff and those system problems that then push people to do things that they probably or most likely wouldn't have done. And it's interesting. I appreciate that you brought up like what would that be like if I was told that how I feel and my sexuality was wrong. The part of the reason why I have diverse guests on the show is to make sure that they're being heard and that their voice is out there. But I've also really understood that I was part of that patriarchy of it. Look, I'm a 5'10" average build white man who is straight and lives
Mm.
in America. So for the for the most part, the world, from my eyes as a little kid, was built for me. And then seeing that things weren't like that, it's wild to experience that. And I wish that more people could empathize and try to understand, but it's hard to do that, or at least I think it's hard to do that for people when they're in such a system or they're in such a groove of this is how I've been told that this is. And if you fuck with that, you truly fuck with what's at the core of their being. And the question I'm asked different times with other people that I'm coaching or just talking to, or even here on the show, where they're like, but what if I have to change everything? Like, yeah, what if? Do you want to keep going down this path or do you want to actually live the truth of that? So what if? But that's like a cartoon where like they swallow that pill and you see it pop out their neck,
Yes.
because they're like gulp.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You know, I even carry the empathy for the folks that this country was built for, as you described earlier, because how scary to start to have to question that reality too. Wait a minute, this isn't other people's experience. How I If that's not other people's experience, does that mean my experience is going to get worse if their experience gets better? Do I carry guilt because of their experience? So I can empathize with the fear around that. And I think that the problem is everyone's yelling at each other.
Yeah.
Rather than like trying to say, okay, well, what's it like? What are the pressures that you're feeling on your side? And I know not everybody's ready to have those kinds of conversations, but we kind of have to have them. And we can't yell at each other. People are trying, and I think the yelling can come in all directions. You know what I mean? We can't be afraid to speak and be authentic and share our experiences and try our best to empathize with other people's experiences, even no matter what our preconceived notions might be about those experiences. And we all have them.
Yeah. Oh, it's funny because I think of a conversation with somebody recently where I was like, well, if I say that I want to do this thing and you tell me no, or you want to do something different, I go, well, I believe I'm an intelligent human. I believe that I can make the right decision. Why, therefore, are you making the wrong decision compared to what I'm thinking? And like trying to be sort of very black and white with it. And that's at least the step of going, okay, cool. Well, let me understand. But each time that you said the noise, I think back to before I hit record, and none of you all knew that this was a thing, but we talked about social media. It's just a bunch of noise when it comes to that. Like if you think of the physical realm of social media, you would be walking into a giant room where everybody's just yelling or listing off all these top 3 things that you should do to do whatever the fuck you really don't need to do, or something different that's not going to actually help you process through your trauma or whatever.
Dude, so true. Nick, I was never on Twitter, and I was like, I better jump on Twitter. This seems to be the thing everybody's using, me and my old ass. And I go to look at it, and I'm like, holy shit, people are so mean on here. Like, they can somehow find an argument against anything. You could say, my dog took a shit on the lawn, and there will be people that will be able to argue that with you and try to make you belittle you and make you feel horrible. So I'm like, I can't play this game. Like, this isn't actually getting us anywhere at all. Like, people are just, like you said, they're just ranting to rant. Like, no one feels good about it. I've never seen someone go, social media has been so great for my mental health.
Yeah.
Never.
Ever.
No.
I mean,
no.
I'm trying to think if there's anybody. And again, I had a social media marketing company for a number of years, but that the concept of social media makes sense to be able to be social. This is what I'm doing. This is what's happening. And it's not about just yelling, but it's interesting because there's a lot of just triggers that are being set off. Somebody's like, your dog, I don't have a dog anymore. Wah! And they go crazy. It's like, how the fuck were we supposed to know that? Like, what? It doesn't make any sense.
You're not honoring my grief.
What?
Right?
Yeah. I have to admit though, social media is just kind of trash, but there are certain comments on things that are just so ridiculous and so good, like so ridiculously good at times. Like I'm more on YouTube, and like I said to you, even YouTube and Pinterest, those are search engines. So people, if you're doing anything, get off social media, promote your business through YouTube and Pinterest where it's actually being searched and it's an asset. But looking at some of the comments of stuff, like I saw something the other day, like I'll listen to binaural beats or just instrumental music while I'm working instead of just having some metal just screaming in my head or whatever. And I was going through some of the comments of this one just like jazz work sort of thing. And the guy was like, before I watched this video, my life was in shambles. It was terrible. After this, I've won 3 Nobel Prizes. I've done like and rattled off like 15 ridiculous things, and it's only been 3 weeks. And I was like, so good. Like somebody took the time to be able to think about that, pop that all out. And I hope it's just in good humor of like, this is just the bullshit that people are just like pushing. So I feel like there's so many different avenues that we could go into, and I'm glad that we started to go down, or at least we've traveled a bit down the avenue of this. Let's hone in a little bit more. We're about a half hour into this. I want to spend a little bit more time with you here, but let's actually talk about for the people that are in the spot of the clients that you work with that have shame, that there's so much shame, that they're unsure what to do next. Addictions brew out of shame. There's so much stuff that comes out of that. Just speak to us a little bit about the work that you do and how you work with those people and what you've seen from that work.
It's work. I just want to put that out right away, because I think when people are experiencing shame, it takes a while to even understand that that's the emotion that they're experiencing. Because a lot of times there's anger, there's guilt, there's denial, there's so many other things going on, right? So just to hone into like, what are you actually feeling is a journey within itself, because we're so disconnected from our feelings. So thinking to a specific situation, there's a lot of shame around clients' sexual orientation and their religiosity. So the work we've done is first unpeeling the layers of like, what am I feeling? What are some words I can use? We can start something as basic as worksheets of feelings and emotions, and trying to like use those words to understand the thoughts and the feelings that are going on within somebody, and that can take a while just to be able to do that work, right? And then from that point, what we'll do is we'll look at, okay, so let's talk about you're talking about a lot of guilt around this situation. Well, what does that mean? And a lot of times we'll kind of stumble into shame, and so let's say shame about hiding my sexual orientation from my church. So they're not in a space where they're feeling as one. They're like operating as two separate beings, right? The gay person, the Christian person, and then the shame person right here in the middle, right? So the goal is to bring them all into one. So the work is really helping them explore what it means to have shame, where the shame came from. I like to dig deep into childhood, because there's so many messages that we receive in our childhood about how we're supposed to be, what we're supposed to be, how we're supposed to relate to people, what our faith are supposed to be. So I do a lot of work around what you experienced in the child, who told you what as a child, where did you learn those messages from, did those messages work for that person? So I mean, there's a lot of work around that encompasses the idea of shame. So it's really just getting to know that person, where they're at, and then like tailoring a plan with them to work through it. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I right
Okay.
off the bat saying that there's a lot of work to it. There's a lot of work to all of this. It's so
Yeah.
interesting. Okay, I think at this point you're probably going to be episode 124, 125, something like that. So I've had that many conversations with people in various walks of life and different levels and layers and trauma stories and all that stuff. And there's some major patterns that have really stood out to me. Self-awareness being kind of the primary one, because if you're not aware of something, how the fuck can you do anything about anything? Because you're not
Totally.
aware of it.
Totally.
Um,
Yeah.
but how shame shows up in different ways. And like you were saying, some people are just like, well, I'm just angry. You're not. That's a symptom of it. And being able to dive deeper into that, understand that, and really going through all of that. But I've also realized on my own journey and with all the conversations, even with clients, with all the things, that there's so much more work to do once you get into the work. Like, again, self awareness. You become self aware, then you're self aware, and then you're really self aware, then you're absolutely fucking self aware. And you can't not be self aware of things. Just like you start to
Yes.
process something, and then you go through and you process it again. And you have to process it 15 more times on top of another 100 times. And being able to
Yeah.
do that work isn't for everybody. It is for everybody, but not everybody has it in them to be able to do that. And it's almost like one of those situations. If you're like, well, look, you want to be healed, right? Yeah, absolutely. I don't want this anymore. Great. We're going to need you to put in about 10,000 hours worth of work for this. Like, I can't. I'm all right with my trauma. And they're just like, that's the end of that. But that's not how this is, you know?
No, and it's tough too, because it can be such a luxury to work on the trauma.
Hmm.
If you're someone who can't have your basic needs met, or you're working so hard to have your basic needs met, how do you even begin to unpack the trauma of your situation,
Yeah.
or your childhood? So it's very complicated. So
Mm.
it you I would say that if someone's going to start digging into these things, do it at a time in your life where other parts feel stable.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's such a
Because you don't want to be out looking for a job, moving to a new city, and then you're like, hey, I'm going to start working on my trauma. Like that's not the ideal time to do that, because you can feel worse before you feel better.
Oh, you absolutely do. God, even doing there are certain subconscious processes that I've gone through that are like 2-3 hours long, and I just feel sick afterwards. There's stuff that's just moving through you. And people are like, well, it's not actually a thing. It's like there's energy, there's also toxins that have been broken down that are being released. There are things that have changed, but there's still more work to do. But I'm really glad that you brought up the luxury of it. There are often times where I think, like, I couldn't imagine having kids and working through the stuff that I have to work through. And it makes me think of my parents. I learned a lot from my parents, mostly what not to do. And I love them for who they are and just
Totally.
where they're at,
Totally.
whatever. Um,
All kinds of things, right?
yeah, but there are certain pieces of, like, I couldn't imagine having to go through and do this work, be aware of it, and trying to manage all these other things. But I don't know. And here's where God enters, enters stage left in a sense. Um, I think that's where we get to be able to look at the situation that we have with life and do the work that we can in this moment. Like, anxiety will come from your future thoughts or your past thoughts. It's never actually in the moment because the anxiety is somewhere else. But being able to do what we can do within those moments to be able to do that. Like, I've actually taken precautions to make sure that I never have children. And I'm good with that. That's exactly where I want to be. But kids, there's a big piece of the work that we as Choose Your Calling and what we do, that we want to actually be able to help children to be able to better them. And I hope that it can ultimately help the parents. And it seems like you have some of that too, where you had said earlier that you have conversations and you can level with the parents, you can empathize. And I'm glad that you see that it can be a luxury. But how do you feel about that when you can see the struggle on a parent's face and their kid, or even them, they're just trying to work through stuff?
Fucking sucks, man.
Straight up. All right. Well, that's the end of the episode, everybody.
Yeah. And cut.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's a terrible feeling when you know that people really are trying their best and it's not quite reaching the other party, and there's not maybe a lot of empathy both ways, or people haven't learned how to communicate, so they're not really hearing each other either. So one of the main parts, if I'm working with people, whether it's like family, couples, whomever, people coming together, number one is communication. We have to be able to hear each other right, um, and reflect back what we're hearing. When so much gets lost, I have a lot of exercises around communication and how our own perspectives can influence what we think we're hearing. Our own traumas, or puts on blurred glasses, to different situations, circumstances. We get triggered. But I think one of the most important things when it comes to trauma is to know that, like, you didn't do it, but you're the only one that can make it better. And we can sit here all day and say, this came from this or that. And yeah, like, let's have some empathy around that. This is the reason why this happened. Yes. But you can't live there, because you're the only one that can fix it, and you're the only one that's going to suffer because of it too.
Yeah. Heavy stuff.
Yeah.
It's such a difficult thing to wrap our heads around. Of, yes, that thing happened and I have to do something with it, but how do you do something with it when you're still hurting from it? And again, maybe I feel a lot more or differently or whatever. And I also know that there are people that are out there that are just like me, people that are just like you, and people that experience it differently. But I don't think any of us should do what what we were basically taught in the 80s and 90s of just put fucking dirt on it, get back in the game. Um, you actually need to work through it. But so along those lines, what sort of advice would you give to somebody on their path towards self-mastery?
Be kind to yourself. Working with clients, I have more clients beating themselves up for where they think they should be, at what point and when and how come. Notice your language and notice how you're speaking to yourself. Are you beating yourself up all day with your thoughts? I feel like I'm doing a commercial. Are you beating yourself up all day with your
This is
thoughts?
supported by
But
Ann Russo.
seriously, yeah, right? Like, but seriously, like, we don't notice how we're talking to ourselves.
Yeah.
Oh, stupid. I can't believe I did that. Why? Like, people have this monologue all day long. You might be surprised at how negative it is.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say self mastery is know how you're speaking to yourself, catch yourself, and try to change that around. Whether or not you even believe the positive right now is not the point. It's creating new neural pathways that will eventually start to feel like those things are the truth. And have empathy towards yourself in this process. This you're here on this earth for a short time, a long time, whatever. But like, this is the journey. You're never going to get to the end.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's not like the end. Oh, I did it. I mastered it. That's not going to happen. Just see it as a journey and not a destination.
Absolutely. That's a great way to be able to put it. Even with self-mastery, there have been different people that have told me it's not a destination, it's a journey. And it's interesting
Totally.
when that's brought up. It's like, yeah, I believe that. I don't consider this a thing. Like, we're not getting there. But for us as individuals to put our kind of flag in the ground and be like, this is what I believe. I'm so glad that you've pointed out the journey of it, because it is truly
Yes.
the journey. And we can only do what we can do today. We can't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow's got its own problems. You can't do a damn thing about what happened in the past. You can do something with it today and just enjoy. So, and I really appreciate you being on. Excuse me. Before I let you go, where can people find you and where can they connect with you?
So if they want to connect with me, they can actually just email me at Ann, ANN, at amrtherapy.com. That's my email. Just put in mindset in the headliner there. I'll know where you found me. And I also have a great team of therapists at AMR Therapy too. So, we're here to support 100%. But yeah, email me, hit me up. Let me know what I can do for you.
Awesome. Again, Ann, it's been a pleasure to have you on. I appreciate your time.
Thanks. Thank you, Nick. Enjoyed it myself as well.